friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
All right. How you doing, Kirk?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Derek?
Good. We haven't been back on the podcast together for a while.
Been a few weeks, yeah.
So it's good to be here. Thanks for joining us, Rewind listeners.
Did you get enough turkey on the weekend?
I had some turkey on Friday and some turkey on Saturday, and that was enough turkey for me. Yes. I also had a little prime rib to break it up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I feel like you need some other meats to break up the turkey. Did you get enough turkey?
Yeah, I did. We had everyone over on Saturday night. We had some turkey, and then I had leftovers on Sunday, and it was great.
Did you turkey soup with the leftovers, or just straight turkey?
No,
again?
just straight turkey, mashed potatoes, some good gravy, and yeah, it was good.
Did you do anything actually on Thanksgiving?
No, I know you did, but we just kind of laid low on Thanksgiving Day. We hung out and Shannon and I went for a nice walk together, and that was about it. Yeah, it was pretty quiet around our place. You guys went.
We went to Elora.
Yeah,
I went for a little walk in Elora. It was a lovely. Boys had never actually been there, and Amanda and I were there this summer, and we said, hey, we should bring the boys back in the fall. We'll climb down in the gorge and enjoy the fall colors. It was a really nice afternoon to be over there, and that's when we came back and had prime rib. And
nice.
Got back early enough, got food ready.
Nice.
Great.
And you had a son jumping out of an airplane on Saturday, too.
We did, yeah. It has apparently become a thing in our house for your 16th birthday that you request that as your 16th birthday present. So,
does Jack know that yet?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
So it started with Amanda. Amanda went first when she was 16.
Okay.
She jumped out of a plane.
Okay.
And she shared this, and it stuck in my daughter's brain. So Maya, when she turned 16, she's like, that's what I want to do. I want to jump out of a plane on my birthday. Then Luke was like, well, if they did it, well, I want to do it. But Luke's birthday's in March, and we're like, well, it's not open yet. You don't want to jump now. And then summer just got so busy, and he was working. And the weekends that we could do it, weather didn't cooperate. So finally we looked and we said, hey, we better get this done, or it's going to be over. You're not going to get this done. And we ran out and did that first thing Saturday morning. And yes, then Jack has got it in his brain, I think, that is going to be what he will. Somebody asked me, what are you going to do? And so I have two competing values going on. One, I'm cheap, and I don't want to pay for myself. Like, they're all doing it because somebody else paid for them.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Of course. Absolutely.
No one is paying for me if I do it except for me.
No.
But also, I can't sit around the dinner table and be the only person who is not. Now I'm going to hear about
that's
it.
Right. Now there's peer pressure.
So they're all going to, oh, well, Dad talks a big game. But he's never jumped out of a plane.
Dad's a chicken.
So now we got these competing values.
Now you got to do it just to show your masculinity, right?
Actually, the idea of competing values, I think, ties in maybe really well with what we're talking about today. You and I both talked about generosity on Sunday. And, I think this can be a really tough topic to talk about whenever you start to enter into things that talk about money, because I think money is never just about money.
Nope.
It's about a whole bunch of things. We'll get into that today. We wanted to start with this. I think we all probably could look at our bank statements. Maybe not all of us. Some of us, hey, you have no disposable income. So maybe you have there is nowhere that you would spend money that you would say, I just wasted money on that. At least for myself, there's some things where I look at it and say, I'm really tempted to waste money in this area. Is there anything that you find yourself saying, like this is I'm tempted to waste money on this?
Oh yeah, 100%. And there's more than one thing, but I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind are the Toronto Blue Jays. both because it's expensive to go to a game, and also because They were just such a bad team this year.
Deeply unenjoyable.
It was deeply unenjoyable.
Yeah.
We went to one game. I think it was 1-0, and there was just nothing fun about it.
You can have a bad team that you still enjoy rooting
You
for,
can.
but this was not that.
No. And we cut back on the number of Jays games we went to this year in part, and I kept saying around my house, I am not wasting money on this team. But I was tempted to. There's, I have a brand new grandchild. I really want to buy her like a little jersey, but she's going to outgrow the jersey in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
probably not worth the $100 that I have to.
The
drop
photo
on
lasts
jersey.
forever.
Yeah.
Kirk. The photo, her with grandpa in your matching jerseys.
True. It's true. I think you just sold me on the need to buy her jersey now. Thanks, Derek.
I would say for me, it is eating out. I love to eat and I hate to cook.
Yep.
So
It's a deadly combination.
it's a very bad combination. I'm thankful I have a wife that is a wonderful cook and often provides meals for me, but she's not my cook. That's not her job.
And eating out is getting so expensive.
It is like you go to like McDonald's, it's like $15.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know.
I don't want to eat anywhere now where I don't have a coupon. I have to have a coupon if I'm going to buy something from a restaurant or I've got a gift card from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, that is my thing.
And you're still at the stage where you're buying like meals for your kids too.
Oh,
So
the five of us, I just like, we guys, we can't go. Like, it's got to be a special occasion.
it does
for the five
because
of
it's
us to
so
go.
expensive to
Way
go for
too
the whole
expensive.
family.
You buy your food, and you think, well, the food's expensive, but then it's like almost $4 for a drink if someone buys a drink, and then you're paying the tip on top of that tax, and it's crazy.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And you want to be generous with your tip.
You do. You do.
You don't want to be that person.
Because they're going to show up at church.
That's right.
What people don't know, Kirk, is you just never know when you're in our shoes. Like,
You don't.
when you're going to see them. I've run into people before,
Yep.
and at the very end of everything, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've been to Ford. I saw you there before.
Oh, yeah.
I knew you were the pastor there."
I've been in restaurants where people have said to me like, "You're my pastor," and I'm
Yep.
like, "Oh, okay."
Sorry for that 5%. Just ignore that.
That's right.
Money is a difficult thing, and it's difficult for us to kind of, I think, oftentimes take a clear eye at ourselves when we're dealing with money. And then what people may not know is that for most of us as pastors, it's not a deeply comfortable thing to talk about. Why do you think money is so difficult? Out of all the topics that we talk about, I would say it's definitely up there as one of the most difficult topics to talk about. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of it is, I'll just speak for me personally. I think some of it is, number one, nobody likes to talk on a topic when you know that there's going to be people who are upset with you when you're talking on it.
Yeah.
And
It's not pleasant to go and know ahead of time, I'm going to say this. And it doesn't matter how I say it, what I say, somebody is not going to take this well.
right. And so there is a part of you that just is not terribly excited about standing up in front of a crowd, knowing somebody's going to get upset with what you say. Some of it is also because, honestly, I think about people who are visiting our church, and I think, oh man, this is the one Sunday they're going to show up, and we're going to talk about money, and what's their impression going to be of us as a church and us as pastors as we're talking about it. So that's something that I think about.
Yep.
And then there is, and I would say this is not only true about money, but anything that we preach on. If I know that there are things that I struggle with what Jesus is teaching, where I'm still being sanctified in those areas of my life, there's always this part of me that feels, man, I don't feel entirely adequate to speak about this.
Yeah.
Because if someone were to open up my bank statement and do an audit of my bank statement, what would it reveal about what I love?
Yep.
Right. And so there's an awkwardness there that goes with it. And yeah, those would be some things. What about you? Like, what do you think? Why do we struggle?
Yeah, I think all those are true. Like I mentioned to your last point, I think I said on Sunday, I can't remember everything that came out of my mouth, but I do think I said that whenever you're preaching a message, the very first person and the person you preach it to most is yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, it's difficult because, I'm well aware there are areas of my life where probably I'm got long ways to go in growing in my own generosity.
Yeah.
I do think, we went to Matthew chapter 6 today or on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jesus kind of puts his finger on why no matter what you say on this, people are going to get angry. And that's because money is probably the most popular imposter god. So I'm putting my finger on a divided loyalty. I'm pushing against a God who doesn't want to be dethroned in somebody's life.
You think it's the biggest imposter god? Like, I mean, it's up there for sure.
I think if you just list off, okay,
Like sexuality.
where do people find their security?
Yep.
Where do people find their peace?
Yep.
Especially a lot of times with men, where do people find their value and worth?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think, I listed off a whole bunch of these on Sunday, and I realized, like, even for me, it's a constant temptation. Where am I going to find my joy and happiness? Well, it's going to be in what money provides me.
Right.
It's going to be the experiences that it gets me. I think money promises everything that God promises us. And we're constantly being pulled as to whether we're actually going to believe that God delivers that thing or money delivers that thing, even in a way that is more daily than sex or sexuality is.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that and I think particularly in Western culture, in a consumeristic culture, we are so deeply ingrained in it that we don't even. I'm not even sure that I'm fully aware. Which makes sense because Jesus, of all the things that Jesus warns people to watch out for, he warns people to watch out for greed.
Yep.
Because we can be so blind to it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of other things we can be a little bit more aware of. But I do think that it's the number one imposter god.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I see it because I think we spend a lot of time. Let's face it, we're going to have an election at some point in the next year.
Yep.
And the number one issue that most people are going to be voting based on is how are you going to help my wallet?
That's right.
And if most of us were to think about the past week, think about the things that think about how many times you got worried about money, got frustrated with money,
Yep.
talked about money. Like, it is definitely part of our everyday reality.
When you're considering a new job, is your first priority in considering that new job, Lord, how can I best serve you in this, or what does this pay versus the current job I'm in?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Those are all deeply personal questions,
Yeah.
right?
No, again, you and I are sitting around. I hope everybody on the podcast understands. Kirk and I are speaking like as people who are hearing this ourselves, like struggling with these realities ourselves. And I do think in our context and culture, now I think it's not by chance that of all the things Jesus picks, you can't serve God or money, that he chooses money as the thing.
Yeah.
Even then, but I think especially in what is a hyper-consumeristic culture, I just think, man, it is so difficult to untangle ourselves from the priorities and thought processes that push us towards a loyalty to money at all times.
Yeah. No, it's very true.
Which raises this question. As a Christian, is it really incumbent upon me that I have to give my money? Jesus says, hey, it seems to say it would be the wisest thing to store up for myself treasure in heaven, but do I actually have to give if I'm a follower of Jesus?
Short answer, yes. Yeah, I mean, this is why I love the idea of generosity in what we talked about, because this whole series has been about growing up in Christ. This whole series has been about being people who grow to imitate God and what God is like. And when you recognize what the scripture teaches, which is everything we have actually comes from God, right? You know, it all belongs to him in reality.
Yep.
Then it actually changes your posture a bit when it comes to money, because you realize it's not even my money to start with.
Right.
But yeah, we do have to give our money to the Lord's work in part. You see it modeled in the Old Testament with what the Jews were called to give to the ministry of the temple. And you see it again show up with Jesus' teaching in the New Testament. And you see it in the church in the New Testament in terms of how they enabled the gospel to go out and how they supported each other and cared for each other through their giving. And in some ways, I mean, they were crazier people than we are.
Right.
I mean, they're selling everything they own and saying, I'm just going to give it to the church and let the church split it up however the church wants to split it up. Like that's way outside our mindset in cultural reality when it comes to giving.
Right. And I think I actually use the terminology wealth a lot more than I used money on Sunday, because I think we tend to think about maybe our paycheck coming in or our income, but we don't tend to think about the wealth that God has given us. What have we accumulated totally, right?
Oh yeah. Try to clean out your house one weekend and see all the things you've accumulated.
Yeah. In fact, if you know anything about wealth accumulation and the richest people in the world, you quickly learn actually the reason they don't pay much tax is they don't make much income.
That's right.
What they do is they let wealth build wealth.
Yep.
And it's a very different way of thinking about it than most of us who find ourselves in the working middle class, earning a paycheck, come to think about things, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think Jesus would say that. I use the analogy on Sunday. I talked about Mackenzie Scott, who is the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. She's, depending on who you read, she's worth somewhere between $32 and $34 billion. She gave $100 million away.
Is she looking for a church to support?
I don't know. I can send her a message.
Okay.
And in our thinking, we think, wow, what a generous person. She gave $100 million away.
Right.
That's incredibly generous.
Right.
But is that generous, Kirk?
It's not.
If you have $34 billion and you give away $100 million, is that generous?
No.
Well, why isn't it? Because it sounds like a really generous number. What is it that differentiates giving a large amount from generosity?
You can be faithful in giving without being generous.
Okay.
There's lots of people who...
I don't think we think that way.
No, we don't. There are lots of people who give.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as being generous. That's checking a box and saying, I did my charitable duty of giving some money to somebody. Generosity, and I think both of us touched on this, but generosity always requires some level of sacrifice. It's going to hurt at some level for you to be generous. And I think that we actually use the word generous way too loosely in our North American culture, even in our church culture. You know, we've had conversations about like our church is truly generous, and by how are we measuring whether or not we're really generous, or are we just good givers? And those are two different things. I think about the story of the widow's mite, and Jesus talking about how this woman comes and she gives all that she has, and the rich people came and they put some money in, and Jesus says she gave more than the rich people did. Not necessarily in quantity, but what it cost her was greater than what it cost the rich people. In Kitchener, I told a story on Sunday about my mom who
I heard that
lived in long-term care, and she made $2,000 a month. It cost her $1,900 a month for her room and her food. Which means she had $100 left over every month. And she said to me every single month, Kirk, make sure you put $50 in and give it to the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm like, Mom, that leaves you with nothing.
Right.
And she's like, I don't care. I got
She
it.
wasn't gonna. Knowing your mom, she wasn't spending that other $50 all on herself either.
No, she wasn't. She was giving it away to her grandkids for the most part. And, like she was just all in on, I've got to give this money. I want to, and I've got to give this money to the Lord. And, she modeled generosity for me because I saw what it cost her, the sacrifice that she made. And she didn't give nearly as much as other people give.
Yep.
But the cost to her was huge.
The generosity was much higher. And I do think even in the church community, we often think, well, somebody who gives the most is the most generous.
Right.
That is not at all what Scripture would teach us.
No.
I know this story as well, but a guy like Rick Warren, his story has always been incredible to me. For those who don't know Rick, he founded what is probably one of the top 3 largest churches in North America, Saddleback Church. Wrote a incredibly popular book that sold well outside of just the church world called The Purpose Driven Life, but it was ultimately about finding purpose in a life with Jesus. And he made so much money off of that book that he got to the point where he paid back all of the money that the church had ever paid him in salary. And he only took out of what he made what he felt he needed to live, and he gave the rest of it away. So he got to the point where he was well beyond reverse tithing. He wasn't even keeping 10% of what he earned, and he was giving away more than 90% of everything that came in. That is what generosity ultimately looks like.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's all kinds of stories.
You told me a story about a pastor we both know.
Yeah. I know a pastor who he was a pastor of a church in an inner city community, and he had a bunch of very wealthy people who wanted to start coming to his church and help out the poor people who are in the community. And the pastor said, hey, there's kind of 2 conditions. The first is you got to move into our neighborhood. So you got to leave your rich neighborhood and move in with the people we're ministering to. And he goes, and the second condition for you to come to our church is this. I want you to think about how much money do you need to live on? Because all that God's ever promised you is to supply your needs.
Yep.
So figure out, he goes, I'm not going to tell you what those needs are.
He wasn't giving them a number. He wasn't judging what they felt their needs were.
I'm not going to tell you what the needs are. You figure it out for yourself what your needs are, including saving up for the future and your retirement and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then he said, and then I'm going to challenge you to give the rest away. Live on what you need, give everything else away, because God didn't promise you anything more than what you need.
Yep.
And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, why did God give you the rest of it then?
Yep.
And he had several people who really took him up on that challenge and ended up living a life of generosity that way. And I thought, first of all, it's bold for a pastor to ever say that to someone. But second, good for him, because I think it reflects what Scripture is over and over again calling us to, this life of generosity.
So I don't know about you, but often the question I get in this then still is, so how much do I have to give to the church?
Oh, yeah.
So I think we got to deal with that.
I really?
I think we have to deal with that. If someone came to you and said, Kirk, I hear you. I know I should give. What should I give to the church? How would you respond to that?
So I'm going to back up and say, and I didn't listen to your message. I didn't get a chance to listen to your message, so I don't know if you covered this. But one of the things I said in Kitchener on Sunday is I know there's a lot of people who will talk about, are we still supposed to give a tithe?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to still give 10%? And one of the things I said is 10% is a great goal to aspire to.
Yeah.
Because most people, if we're honest, we're not giving 10%.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a great goal to aspire to.
And 10% for a lot of people is going to be incredibly sacrificial.
It will be.
Yeah.
Right? But for other people, it's not.
Yeah.
So, I said it's a nice goal to aspire to, but it's not a definition of being generous.
Yeah.
It's something that you can check off a box and say, I'm giving my 10%. And so I would say it's more about, I would not lean into giving someone a specific number to say you have to give this much to the church. What I would say is the church biblically should be your starting point of what you give and probably take up the majority of what you give.
Yep.
I don't think it should be exclusive.
Yep.
I think it's good for us to support things outside of our local churches.
Yep.
But I've, even just in the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 different conversations with people who have said this to me. Well, I just assumed that the church would be fine financially. And so I've given more money to other things other than the church.
Yep.
And, if that prevailing thought existed for all of us who are part of the church,
Yep.
We might find ourselves as a church going, we can't do the ministries that God has called us to do in caring for each other and bringing the gospel to our own community and around the world in the global engagement partners that we have. I think there's a biblical pattern through the whole New Testament where people give first to their church.
Yeah.
There's not... there's a North American mindset that says, I want to give to what I want, when I want, because it makes me feel good about the cause.
Yeah.
And I think you sent me a quote from a church down in the States. I forget exactly how it's worded, but the idea is basically like when you give to a church, you're not going to get the credit. Jesus is going to get the credit.
Right.
There's not a donor development department in the church that's sending out a thank you note to you every time you make a gift to the church.
Yeah, and the organization that maybe is getting that money through the church isn't looking and saying, wow,
right,
Bob Smith, super generous giver.
Right.
They're saying, wow, that church was incredibly generous. And ultimately the church is Jesus's church.
That's right. So there is this, I would lean into your number one responsibility in giving, and the biblical pattern is to support the work of your local church. I'd also say when I worked in parachurch ministry, I communicated that exact same thing to people.
Right.
When I needed people to give money to my parachurch ministry to fund us, I always told people, please don't give to us if it means it's going to compromise what you give to your local church.
Right.
You need to support there first. And then if you've got anything left over to support us, thank you. But please be invested in your church first. How would you answer that question?
Yeah. So a couple things I would say. One, I mean, I guess Tim Keller gave a genius response to this that I've borrowed a couple times when I've been asked. He said, I often get asked about what percent do I have to give to the church? He said, well, in the Old Testament, they gave 10% to the church, and that was the standard of giving. And the person will be, well, I'm not an Old Testament. What about in the New Testament? He's like, well, let me just ask you this. In the New Testament, have we seen more or less of God's grace than we saw through the Old Testament?
Right. Right.
And then he said, so just give according to how much grace you've seen and received from God. Which I think is just a genius.
It's a genius answer that you'll never be able to actually do.
Yeah, I have done it. The other thing that I would say is, to your point about giving to the church first, because I personally struggled with this at different times. The church is God's plan A for His mission in the world to make disciples of Jesus Christ, as we would phrase it, who love God, love others, and serve the world. When we were in Matthew 6 this week, what Jesus makes clear is not that anything that you spend money on in from an earthly perspective is worthless, but it's not lasting.
Right.
The only thing that lasts are eternal things. And ultimately, I would say the church is in the world of eternal business. Mm-hmm. So, I love the food bank. I think the food bank is great. We support the food bank here at the church. Mm-hmm. But hungry people who don't know Jesus are still going to hell.
Right.
Ultimately, I don't want people to just be fed.
Right.
I want them to meet Jesus. So, and I would challenge, if you don't, and I said this on Sunday, if you don't believe that's what we're about and that's what we're doing, that's what our focus is, then you should call us out on that and probably maybe find another church if we're not going to change gears, because that's what we need to be about. We need to be about the most important mission in the world.
Yep.
And I want to give my money to the most important things.
Yep.
First.
Yep.
Which doesn't mean I'm not going to give to other things.
Yep.
But I do think we have to sometimes just stop and see. I totally agree with you on. I mean, that's why I sent you the quote, because when the first time I heard them say that, I thought, oh man, that's so true. That Jesus gets the glory, not me. Whose glory am I most interested in?
Yeah, and on that one, it made me pause and think about my life serving in parachurch ministries, and there are great ministries out there. Like I love deeply and appreciate the work they do. And I mentioned this on Sunday in Kitchener. I can promise you that in those ministries and charities that are out there, there are entire donor development departments who are trained with the idea of how do I make that individual feel special so they'll give us more money.
Right.
And so the communications that you're receiving and all those things are all designed to kind of keep encouraging you and making it very personal towards you as an individual, so that you have greater affinity to that organization. And when you give to a church, it's a very different thing. And you're not always getting those appreciation comments.
Yep.
It's less about how it makes you feel, somebody thanking you personally for a gift, than it is when you give to other charities. And you really are left in a space of, I'm entrusting that this is being given to accomplish the mission of Jesus, and that Jesus is the one who's getting the glory for this when you give to the church. And that, like, in our culture, that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
Although I think if you back up in the Sermon on the Mount, you hear Jesus challenging us on some very similar things about what we do religiously, right? And he basically, and I think he would say to this, if you just take the principle over, because he talks about, if you pray in public so that other people can hear you and think what a great job you've done, you already got your reward. I think the same thing he would say is probably true. Like if you give so that everyone thinks what an outstanding person this is, and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy and you get all the accolades, I think Jesus I think some of us are going to show up in heaven and we're going to be like, all right, Jesus, where's all my rewards? He's like, what do you mean? You got your rewards already.
Yeah.
So I thought I was storing up treasures in heaven. Well, if you're storing up treasures in heaven, why were you so concerned about what people on earth were going to think?
Right. Yeah, no, it's very true. It's very true. It's very humbling when it comes to how we give, where we give, why we give.
Yeah.
I think also just on what you were saying about being focused on the mission, it doesn't mean that the church doesn't care about feeding the hungry or caring for the poor or caring for the marginalized in any way. And that is part of us living out our mission. It's part of the reason why we have Safe Families as part of our global engagement partners, right? Like we collectively as a church, we invest in Safe Families each year as part of our budget. So when people are giving to the church, and you see that pattern in the New Testament where the church was invested in caring for the needs of those the physical, practical needs that people had. And so, it's a collective effort to advance the mission of Jesus. And that's what we're investing in.
Yep. I think one of the things, and I think this is, I think there's wisdom in what people ask me, but people often say, how can I know the church is spending funds properly, right? The issue of transparency, I think, has become a good one. I'm glad people are asking more questions. I think there probably was a long period of time, at least in church life, where people just kind of gave. And I think some of this probably has to do with some scandals that have come up over time. And so if someone were to say to you, Kirk, I just I'll give to the church, but I want to make sure that money is being spent appropriately. How would you help assure someone of that?
Yeah, I think in that kind of a situation, I would probably want to unpack a little bit more of, hey, if someone's saying that, quite often there are some specific things that they're concerned about.
Is there a line item in the budget you would like to talk about?
Right, because what I can point to, at least in the context of Forward, I can't speak for other churches, but what I can talk about in the context of Forward is this. every year, the members of our church vote on and approve a budget.
Yep.
Where the lines of how much it costs for each ministry in the church and our global engagement partners and everything are listed there.
Yep.
So people can see that and they get a chance to vote on, do they agree or not that that's what we want to be investing in our ministries.
Yep.
Then there's also the reality that every year we make available our audited financial statements. Yep. So people can see, are we actually operating in a legal way, not illegal, a legal way.
Yeah.
And are we functioning according to the ways that we set out our budget at the end of the year? So there's both a front end and a back end reporting.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love about Forward is the fact that we have not only a board of governance that oversees our staff, but we also have a treasurer who doesn't serve on our board and isn't part of our staff, who's voted on by the membership of the church to also be in the nitty-gritty of the finances of the church. So that adds a whole other layer of accountability on, are these guys doing anything offsides or not? And so I think Forward has some very good transparency. I think that if people want to understand more details about anything, I would welcome those questions. I would want them to ask those questions, but I would want them to ask the questions, and I would encourage them to ask the questions with this posture. How is this helping us to advance the mission that God's called us to? Because all of us can find a way to save a buck here or there. But what Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 6 isn't, here's how you can save money.
Right.
He's talking about how can you invest money for eternal purposes.
Right. Yep.
Right? So the question isn't, can we save more money in some spots? The question is, are we investing wisely for eternal purposes?
Yep.
That's the question that should always be on the table.
I think that's a great perspective to have. I think one of the things that I've learned over time, I mean, one of the cool things about being a pastor is you get to see oftentimes what a lot of other people do in other jobs. You sit down, you talk to them, you hear what's going on in their lives, their workplaces. I don't think I was too long into ministry when I realized, wow, lots of people in lots of jobs have lots of stuff going on. The things they do are way more complicated than I realized in my external view, right? And I would encourage anybody, if you ever have a question or a concern, to start with, come talk to Kirk or myself. And we'd be happy to walk you through it. There's a lot of thinking and processing that goes into this church in particular. All churches are complicated. This church in particular, because of its size and its multi-site nature, is a really complex beast at times. And I don't think, I mean, Kirk, you were on the board and stepping in, I think you've even found there's more complexity here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I realize when you're living it day in and day out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've served on boards of charities. Like I served on a missions board a number of years ago. And we looked at the budget and we asked questions to understand the budget. But there is a reality that when you're living in it day after day after day, you know things and see things that are impossible for other people to know and see, even when you're serving on a board level.
So there's a level of trust that I know gets asked for in any organization. But like for both Kirk and I, we're happy to sit down and even be challenged on our thinking as to, why is the church spending money here and not there? Or, I think those are all healthy, good things within the life of a church, but I think those take dialogue and a willingness to come forward and ask those questions.
Absolutely.
And so I put that out there right now. Both of us, anytime, we're happy to engage with you on those. I think I want to just kind of end this off with this question. Someone's listened on Sunday, they've been listening today, and they're like, okay, I think I want to enter into growing in my generosity. What is a step or some steps that you would encourage people to take in the area? Particularly, we've been talking about financial generosity. I know both of us talked about the fact generosity is much more than financial, but felt like it was incumbent upon us to kind of drill this down a little bit more and
Yep.
talk about this, how would you advise them?
So the first thing I'm going to say is probably will be the most uncomfortable thing for some people. And my advice to you would be courageous enough to acknowledge that you've got blind spots
Yep.
and invite a mature believer in to look at your financials.
Wow. Great advice. But
And
that is tough.
It is tough, but invite a mature believer in to look at your financials with you. Someone who you know loves you, is on your side. But invite them in to look at your financials and ask them the question, because there are some people who genuinely are generous.
Yep.
And they're going to hear a message like this.
Yep.
And they're going to feel guilty that, oh man, I'm just not generous enough.
Yep.
And honestly, for some of you, you just need an outside voice to say to you, trust me, you're being very generous. And you don't need to feel guilt over a message like this. But because there is this potential of blind spots on our finances, inviting a mature believer in to look at your finances and ask them the question, do you see me being generous? Am I being generous with my finances? And get some perspective and wisdom from them.
Yeah.
Then I would say, then you start to build a plan. Like if you're not, let's assume you're not, then start to build a plan. Don't try to do everything at once because it's unhealthy. You're not going to, you'll end up bitter at some point if you try to do everything at once. But discern together with, as a family and with this counsel to be able to say, hey, what does 1 or 2% or 3% more look like?
Yep.
And take some steps. Set a goal, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road where you might be, but just break it down to some baby steps to help get you there. I don't know. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you give nothing currently, and
Right.
There's a staggering statistic about Canadian culture as a whole. I think it's only 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 Canadians give anything to charity.
Although, but in church world, the vast majority of people who go to churches do give. Faith-based people tend to give more.
Yeah, although I let people know on Sunday, hey, we know how many people attend here, and we know how many people actually gave in the last year, and it means there's a large amount of people who never given anything to the church.
That is very true.
And the first step that I suggest is go to the Lord and ask where to start.
Right.
And give something that is beyond what's a little bit comfortable for you. Just a little bit.
Yep.
And see if God is trustworthy in this.
Yep.
I think some people need to move from the habit of giving when they've got something left over to starting with giving and putting that as the first thing on the list of their budget.
Yep.
Some people have to move from I give once in a while to I'm going to give on a regular, consistent basis. And I'm just going to lock that in.
Yep.
I honestly think there's some people who maybe have lost the joy of giving over time. And my encouragement to you, if you're in a spot where you've just fell into giving as the check mark I put on the list, giving as the duty I enter into, to reflect on where both Kirk and I started in our messages, which is that God is a giver.
Yeah.
And to really spend some time in Scripture reminding yourself of how generous God has been with you. My heart can grow cold to giving at times, but it rarely grows cold to giving when I really am stopping and reflecting on how much I have received.
Mm-hmm.
So those will be, I think you gave some excellent advice for somebody who's just starting in. The other thing I would say is some people in our church probably need to move away from I give my 10%, which we've already talked about, to actually taking stock of what is the totality of what God has given you and what could you get by with and what is he asking you to give up.
Yep.
And I know I don't say that glibly, like I understand that's not a small ask, but if it's God asking you to make it, you should probably tune into that.
I find it's a good idea to listen to him.
Yeah. just where I would. Anything you want to say as we close this up, Kirk?
Yeah, I think that the big thing in all of this is that we as a people need to keep coming back to understanding that giving is not merely about, I got to provide for the financial needs of the church.
Nope.
It is a discipleship issue.
Yep.
It is, how are you growing more and more into the image of Jesus yourself?
Yep.
And the sooner we separate this from, am I helping the church meet budget?
Yep.
Right? Versus, no, am I just being generous?
Yep.
I can't help but think about what is the potential of any church,
Yep.
not just Forward, any church, to advance the gospel, to help those who are hurting and struggling,
Yep.
to truly make and grow disciples of Jesus, if the church became truly generous versus the posture of how are we making sure we're covering budget?
Yep.
Because those are two very different approaches when it comes to our finances and our giving.
Yep.
And so my encouragement to people is, let's all ask the Holy Spirit to search our hearts and our lives and to ask us, like, are we really being generous? And if we are, praise God.
Yep.
Take joy in the stories that you hear in our church family of what God's doing, and take joy in the reality that God is allowing you and I to be part of those stories through the giving that we're making. And let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great advice, Kirk. I think we'll close it off there. If you have any questions for Kirk or I on this area of giving, you want to talk to either one of us more about it, we're happy to dialogue with you on an individual basis. We are so thankful for each and every person who does give. And some of you give incredibly generously towards the work of God through Forward Church. And we're humbled to be a part of what this church gets to do because of the way that God's people come together to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
See you next week, Rewind listeners.